Chapter 1. The Big Four. High above the water, in a modern beach house in Mississippi, 4 gentlemen enjoyed drinks and waited for a visitor. Normally, their work required them to be enemies. This afternoon, however, they'd played golf and eaten grilled seafood together. Each of the men was CEO of a large public corporation. These corporations were extremely successful. The smallest had sales of $600 million, the largest $4 billion. Although they manufactured other things, their real profits came from cigarettes. The companies represented here were responsible for 98% of all cigarettes sold in the United States and Canada. The tobacco business was becoming more and more unpopular. The Big Four, as the 4 corporations were known in financial circles, were attacked by the public, the medical profession, and even some politicians. And now the lawyers were pursuing them. The survivors of dead smokers were suing them, claiming that cigarettes caused lung cancer. There had been 16 trials. Until now, the tobacco companies had managed to win every case. But the pressure was increasing. If they lost a single one, they'd face possible claims from millions of people. To help fight these court cases, the Big Four had put together a sum of money called the Fund. The Fund was a secret. Officially, it didn't exist. The money in it was used to hire the best defense lawyers for the trials. It paid for well-spoken experts to help persuade people that cigarette smoking didn't necessarily kill you, and the cleverest jury consultants. Before a trial, the jury consultant's job was to find out all they could about possible jurors, so they could predict whether they might be sympathetic to the tobacco company's case or not. The fund was managed by a man called Rankin Fitch. The 4 CEOs disliked him, but they listened to what he said and, when necessary, obeyed the instructions he gave. He'd directed 8 trials without a loss. Now they were waiting for him to arrive to tell them about the latest trial, Wood versus Pinex. Pinex was the 3rd largest of the Big Four. Its CEO was D. Martin Jankel. "Fitch is here." The 4 men each reached for their drinks as Fitch walked into the room. He was a big man in a dark suit. He looked important. An assistant handed him a glass of water, and he waved away a plate of seafood. "A brief summary, gentlemen. At the moment, the entire defense team is working non-stop, and this will continue through the weekend. Investigations into possible jurors are on schedule. Trial lawyers are ready, witnesses are prepared, all our experts are already in town." "What about the jurors?" asked Jankel. It was his corporation's lawsuit, and so he was the most nervous. "One problem juror can be poison." "I'm aware of that," Fitch replied coldly. "I assume the plaintiff's lawyers are ready?" asked another CEO. "Safe assumption," said Fitch. This latest challenge to the tobacco companies had been organized carefully. There were 8 lawyers at the last count, financed by 8 of the largest law firms in the country, who'd each contributed $1 million. The lawyers had picked the plaintiff, the widow of a man named Jacob L. Wood. They'd picked the place, on the Mississippi coast, because juries in Biloxi could be generous in this kind of case. They were even lucky with the judge, the Honorable Frederick Harkin. He'd previously been a plaintiff's lawyer. The opposition were certainly ready. This wasn't an ordinary tobacco case, and everyone in the room knew it. "How long will the trial last?" Jankel finally asked. 4 to 6 weeks. Jury selection goes fast here, replied Fitch. How long should we stay in town? I don't care. You can leave now, or you can wait until the jury is picked. You all have big jets. If I need you, I can find you. He was suddenly ready to leave. Anything else? Not a word. Wendell Rohr, the main lawyer for the plaintiff, had made and lost his first fortune before he was 50. He made his second fortune and swore never to lose it. His energies were directed at suing American corporations on behalf of injured people. He'd met Celeste Wood, widow of Jacob Wood, through a young lawyer. Jacob Wood had died at the age of 51 after smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day for almost 30 years. Rohr had raised the first $1 million to fight the case, and then more money had flowed in. His plan was simple and smart. If he won this case, more people would decide to sue. With 100 million smokers out there, he'd be busy for the rest of his working life. Rohr operated from offices near the courthouse, and his team was working hard investigating possible jurors. The tobacco lawyers were down the street, working just as hard. Nothing rivaled the thrill of big lawsuits. By 8 a.m. on Monday, a crowd was gathering outside the Biloxi courthouse. There were Wall Street financial analysts who were specialists in the price of tobacco shares, sent to follow the early developments of the trial. There was a group of people growing larger by the minute, each holding a piece of paper. A jury summons. 7 deputies had been assigned to security duties. At 8:30, the doors to the courtroom on the second floor opened. A court official, Gloria Lane, checked each summons, greeted the people she knew, and organized them into their seats. There were 194 possible jurors. All were given forms to complete. The lawyers arrived in dark suits and tried to look at the jurors without being noticed. Behind the lawyers sat the jury consultants, watching the possible jurors for any gestures, arms folded across the chest or fingers picking nervously at teeth, which might reveal their real thoughts and opinions. Juror number 56, Nicholas Easter, received more than his share of anxious looks. He worried the jury consultants, as they hadn't been able to find out very much about him. The last lawyer into the room was Wendell Rohr. He stared at the possible jurors. These were his people. This was his case, in his hometown. He nodded at a couple, grinned at another. Together, they'd find the truth. Rankin Fitch was also in court, pretending to read a newspaper. Then Judge Harkin arrived. He completed a short welcoming speech. The lawsuit had begun 4 years ago, and the documents now filled 11 boxes. Each side had already spent millions to reach this point. The jury selection started. 6 people over the age of 65 who hadn't been identified by the computer were free to leave. 5 of them left. "Is anybody legally blind?" the judge asked. Slowly, a hand was raised from the center of the pack. Juror number 63, Mr. Herman Grimes, age 59, computer programmer, white, married, no kids. What was this? Did nobody know this man was blind? The jury consultants whispered on both sides. "Mr. Grimes, you are excused from jury duty. You're free to go." Herman Grimes didn't move. He just looked at whatever he could see and said, "Why do I have to leave?" "Because you're blind." "I know that.
Who says blind people can't serve on juries? You tell me why. If it's written in the law is unfair, and I'll sue. If it isn't written in the law, I'll sue even faster.
The law said that a blind person may be excused from jury service, so the judge decided not to insist.
On second thoughts, Mr. Grimes, I think you'd be an excellent juror. Please sit down.
Herman nodded politely.
Thank you, sir.
The judge continued to release possible jurors with physical problems. At noon, 13 had been dismissed. By 3 p.m., the number remaining was down to 159. Then the group were asked about any non-medical problems. 11 more were dismissed, and another form was given out with instructions to the jurors that they should complete it by 9 the next morning. The form included questions like, do you smoke cigarettes? Do you want to stop? Has any member of your family or anyone you know well suffered any disease or illness directly linked to smoking cigarettes? Other questions explored their opinions on tax and smokers' rights. Then, do you know any of the lawyers working on the case? Do you know any of the possible witnesses? Nicholas Easter made another cup of coffee. He'd spent an hour with the questions last night and another hour this morning. He knew that handwriting experts would study everything he wrote. He wanted to appear neat, thoughtful, and intelligent, a juror that both sides would love. Many of the questions had been used in the Cimino tobacco case last year in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Nicholas had been a possible juror in that case, too. But then he'd been known as David Lancaster, a part-time film student with a beard and glasses. He hadn't been selected for the jury. A month later, he'd shaved his beard, thrown away his glasses, and left town. Nicholas knew that there were people on both sides trying to find out about his past. His present apartment was only a temporary home. It was basic, but although he had a better address 4 blocks away, he couldn't risk being seen there. In court on the second day, the forms were collected from the possible jurors, and 6 more were excused for personal reasons. Then the show began. Wendell Rohr introduced the plaintiff, Celeste Woods, to the court. A small woman of 55, she tried to look as if she was still saddened over the death of her husband, although he'd been dead for 4 years. In fact, she'd almost remarried, an event which Rohr had persuaded her to cancel when he heard about it. She could marry after the trial, he told her. Rohr started questioning the possible jurors about their previous jury service and their opinions on the rights of victims and the price of insurance. The jury had a lunch break. Gloria Lane and her staff handed out box lunches to the lawyers, containing thin sandwiches and red apples. This was going to be a working lunch for them. Outside the courtroom, forms were being analyzed by the jury consultants, and the results were being fed into computers. After 3 hours' discussion with the lawyers, the judge removed another 31 names. The group was down to 111. The following morning, it was the turn of the main lawyer for Pinex, Durwood Cable, senior partner for Whitney and Cable and White. His opponent, Wendell Rohr, was friendly and sociable. Cable, on the other hand, seemed quieter. He talked slowly, but his gray eyes missed nothing.
My name is Durwood Cable, and I represent Pinex, a company that has been making cigarettes for 90 years.
There, he wasn't ashamed of it. He did an expert job of persuading his audience that his client was almost likable Cable then talked about the freedom to choose whether to smoke cigarettes or not. He asked a lot of questions, got a few responses, and finished at noon, in time for a quick lunch. Before 3 o'clock, the lawyers on both sides had to agree on the final jury selection. According to the rules, each side could ask for a number of strikes, which meant that a possible juror could be dismissed for no reason. Because of the importance of this case, Judge Harkin had granted each side the right to do this 10 times, instead of the usual 4. The process started. Out of the first 30 names, 10 were selected. Finally, the jury was complete, and Nicholas Easter had become the 11th juror for Wood versus Pinex. When the courtroom was opened at 3, Judge Harkin called out the names of the chosen 12. Nicholas, 27, was the second youngest juror. There were 9 whites, 3 blacks, 7 women, 5 men, 1 blind. In the corner of the jury box, there were 3 extra jurors. These would replace any member of the jury who had to leave the jury for some reason. The judge forbade the jurors from discussing the case with anyone, and, with a pleasant smile, dismissed them for the night. Chapter 2. The Case Opens. At 8:30 in the morning, Nicholas slipped through the unlocked back door of the courthouse and went up to the second floor. He knew the building well. 3 weeks earlier, unnoticed, when there was no one around, he'd explored the area around the courtroom, including the judge's chambers, the witness rooms, and, of course, the jury room. He went there now and found Lou Dell sitting outside the room, reading a romantic novel.
Good morning. Can I help you?
Her entire face was one large smile. "Nicholas Easter," he said, as he reached for her outstretched hand. She found his name on her paperwork.
Welcome to the jury room. Is this your first trial?
"Yes."
Come on,
she said, pulling him into the room.
Coffee and cakes are over here. I made these cookies myself.
Nicholas poured black coffee into a plastic cup. There was a list of instructions for the jurors from Judge Harkin, including the order that they couldn't discuss the case with anyone. They couldn't even discuss the case with each other until instructed by the judge. Nicholas signed the list at the bottom, as requested. The door opened with a kick, and Mr. Herman Grimes entered with his walking stick tapping along in front of him. His wife was close behind, describing the room to him under her breath. Nicholas introduced himself. "My favorite uncle's blind," Nicholas said. "I'd consider it an honor if you'd allow me to assist you during the trial." "Thank you," said Herman after a brief pause.
Thank you, sir,
his wife said. At 10 o'clock, Judge Harkin looked around the crowded courtroom and decided that everyone was in place. "Bring in the jury," he said. The jurors walked in. "Good morning," said the judge. "Do we have a foreman?"
It's me, Your Honor,
Herman Grimes said. The lawyers and jury consultants for the defense were worried by this choice of foreman, but their expressions remained warm and positive. Nicholas Easter looked cautiously around the courtroom. On the second row, behind the defense, Rankin Fitch sat trying to look uninterested in the jury, but Nicholas knew better. Fitch missed nothing. 14 months earlier, Nicholas had seen him in the Cimino courtroom in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Nicholas knew that Fitch would have investigated his background and found that some of what he'd said wasn't true. There were also small groups of people whom Nicholas was certain were the jury consultants. The selecting was done, so now they moved to the next phase: watching. They listened to every word spoken by every witness and predicted how the jury would react. If a witness seemed to make a bad impression on the jury, they could be removed, sent home, and replaced by another witness. After a sign from the judge, Wendell Rohr started his opening statement. He told the jury that he'd prove that Mr. Jacob Wood, a fine fellow, developed lung cancer after smoking cigarettes for almost 30 years. The cigarettes killed him. How could they prove that cigarettes caused lung cancer? They'd bring along cancer experts and talk to people who used to work in the tobacco industry. Rohr finished in 50 minutes, smiled, and sat down. Durwood Cable, for the defense, spoke for under 30 minutes. He calmly assured the jurors that Pinex had its own experts who would clearly explain that cigarettes don't cause lung cancer. Cable spoke without notes, looking carefully into the eyes of each juror. His voice and stare were honest. You wanted to believe this man. The first crisis occurred at lunch. Judge Harkin announced the noon break at 12:10, and the jurors left the court. Lou Dell took them to the jury room.
Just have a seat, she said, and lunch will be here in a moment.
Herman Grimes took a seat at the head of the table next to Millie Dupree, a kind woman of 50 who actually knew another blind person. Nicholas introduced himself to Lonnie Shaver, the only black man on the jury and the manager of a grocery store. 20 minutes passed, and no lunch appeared. At 12:30, Nicholas said, "Hey, Herman, where's our lunch?"
"I'm just the foreman,"
Herman answered with a smile, as the room was suddenly quiet. Nicholas walked to the door and asked Lou Dell to come in. "We're hungry," he said. Lou Dell looked at the other 11 faces and said,
"It's on the way."
"Where's it coming from?" he demanded.
"O'Reilly's restaurant, just around the corner."
"Listen," said Nicholas, "we can't go out and eat a nice lunch like normal people, so if lunch is going to be here, I hope there isn't going to be a problem every day. I suggest you get on the phone and find out where it is, or I'll discuss it with Judge Harkin." The door closed.
"That was a bit hard, don't you think?"
asked Millie Dupree. "Maybe, and if it was, I'll apologize," said Nicholas. "But if we don't get things organized at the beginning, they'll forget about us. Do you realize that in almost every trial, they allow the jurors to go out and eat?"
"How do you know?"
asked Millie Dupree. "I know a little about the system. I had 2 years of law school." The other jurors were impressed. No food had arrived by 12:45.
"It should be here soon,"
said Lou Dell nervously.
"I'm really sorry."
"Where's the men's room?" asked Nicholas. Lou Dell gave him directions, but Nicholas walked past the door and out of the courthouse to Mary Mahoney's, a local restaurant. Nicholas had done the same walk a week ago, and had even eaten at a table close to Judge Harkin's. He went up to the judge's table. "Sorry to interrupt, sir," Nicholas said. "What are you doing here?" Harkin asked. "I'm here on behalf of your jury. While you're having a nice lunch here, we're sitting in a tiny room waiting for food. We're hungry and we're upset." Harkin stood up. "Well, let's go and see." When they got back to the jury room, the table was bare. No food. The time was 1:05. Lou Dell suddenly arrived. She was breathless.
"I just talked to O'Reilly's," she said. "Someone called them to say we wouldn't need lunch until 1:30.
"These people are starving," said the judge. He turned to the jury. "I'm very sorry. This won't happen again." He paused, looked at his watch, and smiled.
I'm inviting you to follow me to Mary Mahoney's and join me for lunch.
The restaurant served the jurors with delicious grilled seafood. Nicholas was the hero of the day. Later, Mr. O'Reilly met with Judge Harkin. He swore on a Bible that he'd talked to a woman who said she was ringing from the courthouse. She'd instructed him to deliver lunch at exactly 1:30. The trial's first witness was the dead man, Jacob Wood, testifying on a video which had been filmed a few months before his death. He was thin and pale and sounded sick. He was 51 and looked 20 years older. When the jury felt sleepy, the judge gave them a break. The four smokers needed a cigarette, and Lou Dell took them to a separate room.
"If you can't stop smoking after this trial, something's wrong,"
she said jokingly. The four didn't smile. Jerry Fernandez, 38, a car salesman with casino debts and a bad marriage, lit his cigarette first. Then he passed his lighter to the three women.
Here's to Jacob Wood,
Jerry said. The three women said nothing. They were busy smoking. One of them was a tall woman with a long pointed nose called Sylvia Taylor Tatum.
I wonder who's next,
Jerry continued.
"I guess all those doctors,"
Sylvia replied, sucking hard on her cigarette. The woman's name was Marlee. At least, that was the name she'd chosen for this period of her life. She was 30, with short brown hair and brown eyes. She'd been in the courtroom before, and she knew her way around. She sat in the back row, and just before the judge arrived, she asked one of the deputies to deliver a letter to Rankin Fitch. Fitch was surprised to see his name on the envelope. No one knew his name, except his employees and clients. He read the note.
"Dear Mr. Fitch, tomorrow, juror number 2, Easter, will wear a gray and red sweater, white socks, and brown leather shoes."
Fitch went up to the deputy who was standing by the courtroom door.
Who gave you this? A woman. I don't know her name.
Fitch questioned the deputy about her appearance and voice. With Jose, his driver, he looked around the first floor of the courthouse. Then, as if they were just enjoying some fresh air, the two men walked around the outside of the courthouse. Who was she? And what was going on? Fitch had thought about entering Easter's apartment before, but now he knew it was necessary. He sent Jose and another man, Doyle, to the apartment building while Easter was in court. Inside, Doyle photographed the apartment. He was there for no more than 10 minutes. Nicholas left the courthouse on foot and stopped at O'Reilly's for some food. He was certain he was being followed. When he got to his apartment, he entered a 4-number code on the door before he unlocked it. He went to his computer and found that an illegal entry had occurred at 4:52 p.m. The secret camera, hidden above the refrigerator, had filmed Doyle. Nicholas watched the video and stared at Doyle's face. He'd never seen him before. Nicholas smiled as he saw Doyle looking at his computer. It was impossible to enter. Doyle couldn't even find the power switch. At 8 the next morning, Fitch was hiding in a van by Easter's apartment and watched him walk out into the sunshine. Fitch looked out of the van window.
I don't believe it.
Gray and red sweater, white socks, brown shoes. Fitch went straight to his office.
We have to find the girl, he said. She has something for us.
His office was in the back of an empty store. No one noticed the place, and it was just a short walk from the courthouse. 2 men with guns guarded the door at all times. The furniture was cheap, but the office was full of the latest technology. The walls of one room were covered with photos of the jurors. The room at the back was the smallest and was kept locked. It was a viewing room. One of Fitch's people had hidden a tiny camera in a document case which was placed in the courtroom under the defense table and which secretly filmed all the jurors. In the viewing room, 2 jury consultants watched the results on a large screen. When Fitch talked to Cable, he could tell him how the jurors seemed to be feeling. Cable, however, didn't know about the hidden camera. The deal was organized over a 3-hour lunch. Luther Vandermeer, CEO of Trelco, one of the big 4 tobacco companies, and his friend Larry Zell of Listing Foods had already talked about it on the phone. Trelco wasn't in court this time, but the big 4 had to stand together. Zell understood. He'd worked for Trelco for 17 years. There was a small regional grocery company, Hadley Brothers, which owned stores along the Mississippi coast. One store was in Biloxi, and its manager was a smart young black man called Lonnie Shaver, who, by chance, was on the jury in the Pinex trial. Vandermeer wanted one of Listing Foods' divisions, Superhouse, a much larger group of grocery stores, to purchase Hadley Brothers. It would be a small deal, and nothing could go wrong. Listing and Trelco were totally independent of each other, and Listing was already in the grocery store business. Later, of course, there would need to be a reorganization of the company, and pressure could be put on Lonnie Shaver to support the defense. They needed to act quickly. The trial was only due to last for 4 more weeks. Chapter 3. Lonnie Shaver's Opportunity. Easter made sure he was easy to follow over the weekend. On Saturday, he worked all day selling computers, then he returned to his apartment and didn't leave it. On Sunday, he drove to the harbor, where he met Jerry Fernandez. They left in a fishing boat with 2 others and returned 8.5 hours later with red faces, a can full of fish, and a boat full of empty beer cans. Fishing was the first hobby of Nicholas Easter that anyone had been able to discover. And Jerry was the first friend. There was no sign of the girl. She waited only until Monday morning, 30 minutes before the trial restarted. Fitch was in his office. An assistant, Conrad, said,
"There's a phone call you might like to take."
"Her name?"
"She won't say."
"Any idea how she got the number?"
"No."
"Are you tracing it?"
"Yes. Give us a minute. Keep her on the line."
Fitch lifted the telephone receiver. "Yes," he said as nicely as possible.
"Is this Mr. Fitch?"
she asked, quite pleasantly. "It is. And who is this?"
"Marlee. In about 20 minutes, juror number 12, Fernandez, will walk into the courtroom holding a copy of Sports Illustrated, the October 12 issue."
"I see," said Fitch. "Anything else?"
"No, not now."
Conrad raced in.
"The call came from a payphone in Gulf Point, a convenience store."
"What a surprise," said Fitch, as he grabbed his jacket and began straightening his tie. "I guess I'll run to court." In the jury room, Nicholas waited until the general conversation died down. He said loudly, "Well, did anyone get bribed or followed over the weekend?" There were a few laughs, but no confessions.
"Why does the judge keep asking questions like that?"
asked Millie Dupree. In similar cases, there have been some problems with the jurors, Nicholas explained.
I don't think we should discuss this, Herman said.
Why not? It's harmless. This isn't about evidence. This is about... He hesitated a second for effect, then continued.
This is about trying to control the jury.
Nicholas had the jurors' attention.
There was a tobacco trial, very similar to this, in Quitman County, Mississippi, about 7 years ago. There was some pretty shocking behavior, before and during the trial. Judge Harkin is watching us carefully. Lots of people are watching us.
Who?
Asked Millie. Both sides, answered Nicholas. Both sides hire these jury consultants, and they come here to help pick the perfect jury. The perfect jury is one that will deliver the verdict that they want. They study us before we're selected.
How do they do that? One of the jurors asked.
Well, they photograph us, our apartments, our offices, and our kids. It's just legal, but it's close to being illegal. They might check our tax records and talk to our neighbors.
All 11 jurors were listening, trying to remember if they'd seen any strangers hiding around street corners with cameras. Nicholas drank some coffee and continued.
After the jury's been picked, it's a little different. Now they're only watching 15 people, the 12 jurors and the 3 extra jurors. Throughout the trial, each side will have jury consultants in the courtroom trying to read our reactions. They usually sit on the first 2 rows. They're well-dressed and they stare at us all the time.
I thought those folks were newspaper reporters, said another juror, retired Colonel Frank Herrera.
I hadn't noticed, said Herman Grimes.
Everyone smiled.
Watch them today, Nicholas said. In fact, I have a great idea. There's one woman who I'm almost positive is a jury consultant for the defense. Every morning since the trial began, she's been on the front row behind Durwood Cable. When we go out this morning, let's stare at her. All 12 of us. Even me? Herman asked. Yes, Herm, even you. Just turn to 10 o'clock and stare with the rest of us.
Why are we playing games?
Asked Sylvia Taylor Tatum. Why not? What else have we got to do for the next 8 hours? Let's do it while Judge Harkin is reminding us about all the rules. That always takes 10 minutes.
Lou Dell came for them at 9. Nicholas held 2 magazines, one of which was Sports Illustrated. He walked beside Jerry Fernandez until they came to the courtroom, then said to his new friend, "Want something to read?" Jerry took the magazine. "Sure, thanks," he said. They walked through the door into the courtroom. Fitch knew Fernandez, juror number 12, would have the magazine, but the sight of it was still a shock. His surprise quickly turned to excitement. Marley was clearly working on the outside. Maybe there were 2 or 3 or 4 members of the jury who were plotting with her. It didn't matter how many jurors were involved. Fitch just wanted to make a deal. The jury consultant's name was Ginger. She'd sat through dozens of trials. She looked at the jury and waited for the judge to greet them, which he did. Most of the jurors nodded and smiled at the judge. Then all of them, including the blind man, turned and stared directly at her. She looked away. Judge Harkin continued asking the jurors one question after another, and he too quickly noticed that the jury were looking at the same person. They kept staring, all together. Nicholas found it difficult not to laugh. His luck was unbelievable. 2 rows behind Ginger sat Rankin Fitch. It was difficult to tell exactly who the jurors were staring at, Ginger or Fitch. Ginger certainly thought it was her. She found some notes to read. Fitch felt helpless as the 12 faces studied him. Judge Harkin finished his questions quickly.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Now we will continue with Dr. Milton Frick.
After Dr. Frick had spoken, there was a short break as a new witness, Dr. Robert Bronsky, was called by Wendell Rohr. Fitch was in his office when the call came.
"It's Marlee, line 4,
Conrad whispered.
Trace the call,
Fitch ordered.
Hello.
"Mr. Fitch?"
came the familiar voice.
Yes?
"Do you know why they were staring at you?"
No.
"I'll tell you tomorrow. And if you keep tracing the calls, I'll stop calling."
Conrad arrived with the expected news that the call had been made from a payphone. On Tuesday morning, Nicholas arrived at the jury room early. There were new cups and saucers. Nicholas claimed to hate coffee from a plastic cup, and 2 of the other jurors said they felt the same. The judge had agreed to his request. Retired Colonel Frank Herrera arrived just after 8.
Morning, Colonel,
Nicholas said warmly.
You're early. So are you.
I know. I couldn't sleep. I was dreaming of black lungs. Herrera sat down across the table.
I smoked for 10 years in the Army, he said, but I had the good sense to stop.
Some people can't, I guess. Like Jacob Wood. The colonel made a sound of disgust. Why did you stop?
Because cigarettes are poison. Everybody knows that.
If Herrera had given those opinions on the pre-trial forms, he wouldn't have been selected. But he probably wanted to be on the jury. He was retired, bored with golf, and tired of his wife. So, should cigarettes be illegal? Nicholas asked.
No, I think people shouldn't be stupid and smoke 3 packs a day for almost 30 years. What do they expect?
There was no doubt that his mind was made up. You should have said this during jury selection. We were asked questions just like these, said Nicholas. Herrera's cheeks went red, but he hesitated for a second. This guy Easter knew the law.
Yes, well, I can be persuaded, you know, Herrera said.
After a day in court looking at diagrams of lungs and listening to medical explanations from Dr. Bronsky, Lonnie drove to his supermarket.
"We have guests from head office for you,"
an assistant manager said with a frown. In his office, Lonnie found 3 men.
Lonnie, good to see you,
said Troy Hadley, son of one of the owners. He quickly introduced the others.
Listen, Lonnie, Ken and Ben here are from a company called Superhouse, and, well, for lots of reasons, my dad and my uncle have decided to sell all 17 stores to them.
Lonnie was finding it hard to swallow.
Why? 2 main reasons. Number 1, my dad is 68, and Al, my uncle, has just had surgery, as you know. Also, Superhouse is offering a good price. It's time to sell.
"Will this store be closed?"
Lonnie asked, almost in defeat. Ken picked up a piece of paper.
Well, there are always changes when this sort of thing happens, but we see a future for you with us, Lonnie. We're ashamed to admit that we don't have an African American in a management position. We want this to change. We'd like you to come to Charlotte as soon as possible and spend a few days with us. When can you come?"
In a minute, Lonnie had gone from near unemployment to promotion in a new company. He said with obvious disappointment,
"I'm on jury service."
"But what about the weekends?"
"Can you do this weekend?"
"Sure," said Lonnie. The first person Nicholas saw the following morning in court was the man who'd broken into his apartment. Nicholas had already decided what to do. He wrote a note and asked for it to be handed to the judge. "Judge, that man out there, left side, third row from the front, white shirt, blue and green tie, was following me yesterday. It's the second time I've seen him. Can we find out who he is? Nicholas Easter." The judge called a 10-minute break and asked for Nicholas.
"Now, where did you see this man?"
Nicholas didn't mention the video, but told the judge that he'd seen the man a couple of times recently. The judge relaxed slightly.
"Mr. Easter, have any of the other jurors mentioned anything like this?"
"No, sir."
"Will you tell me if they do? If there's something wrong, I need to know. You can send a note through Lou Dell."
"Well, there is something perhaps you ought to know." He hesitated. "Colonel Herrera thinks that anyone who smokes 3 packs of cigarettes a day for almost 30 years deserves what he gets." The judge digested this information.
"Mr. Easter, I'm not asking you to spy on the other jurors, but I am worried about this jury because of the pressure from the outside. If you see or hear anything, please tell me."
"Sure, Judge." Chapter 4. More telephone calls. The defense's questioning of Bronsky ended late Thursday afternoon, and Marlee struck on Friday morning. Conrad took the first call at 7:25.
"Good morning, Fitch,"
she said sweetly when she was put through.
"Good morning, Marlee,"
Fitch answered with a happy voice, his best effort at pleasantness.
"And how are you?"
"Fabulous. Juror number 2, Easter, will wear a light blue shirt, faded jeans, and running shoes. And he'll bring with him a copy of Rolling Stone, October issue. Got that?"
"Yes. When can we get together and talk?"
"When I'm ready."
Pang, one of Fitch's technicians, was sitting in a coffee shop near Easter's apartment. On time, Easter left his apartment and started his walk to the courthouse. Of course, he was wearing exactly what she'd promised. Marlee's second call came from a different number.
"Something new for you, Fitch. You'll love it. Guess what the jurors are going to do today?"
"Tell me."
"They're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance."
Marlee's third call went to the offices of Wendell Rohr. She was going to send a fax, which must be handed to Mr. Rohr before he left for court. The fax stated which clothes Nicholas Easter would wear that day and hinted at the pledge. Rohr called an emergency meeting. Before the court started, Nicholas waited for a pause in the conversation. "Hey, Herman, I have an idea." By now, Herman knew the other 11 voices from memory.
"Yes, Nicholas?"
he said. Nicholas raised his voice so everyone could hear him. "Well, when I was a kid, we started each day at school with the Pledge of Allegiance. Every time I see a flag early in the morning, I have this desire to give the pledge. And in the courtroom, we have this beautiful flag behind the judge."
"You want to do the Pledge of Allegiance out there in open court?"
asked Colonel Herrera.
"Can't see anything wrong with that,"
said Jerry Fernandez, who'd earlier agreed to support Nicholas.
You're not playing games, are you? Asked the colonel.
Nicholas looked at him with aching eyes and said, "My father was killed in Vietnam. That flag means a lot to me." The plan was agreed. The jurors entered the courtroom. Just before Judge Harkins started his standard speech reminding them that they mustn't have unauthorized contact with anyone, he realized that the jurors were still standing. With their hands on their hearts and led by Nicholas, they said the Pledge of Allegiance. Judge Harkins' initial reaction was of disbelief. He glanced at Rohr and Cable, who were open-mouthed. Then he stood. Halfway through the pledge, he joined in. Suddenly, it seemed important that everyone joined in. The lawyers certainly couldn't show any disloyalty. From the back row, Fitch watched in amazement. A jury taking control of a courtroom. It was extraordinary that Marlee knew it was going to happen. It was exciting that she was playing games with him. But Fitch at least had some idea of what was happening. Wendell Rohr, on the other hand, felt completely defeated. He was shocked by the sight of Easter dressed exactly as the facts had said, and then starting the pledge. He stared at the jury, especially Easter, and wondered what was going on. The pledge finished, and the jurors sat down. Judge Harkins seemed determined to act as if this was normal behavior.
"I believe we're ready for a new witness," he said.
Rohr stood, still shocked, and said,
"The plaintiff calls Dr. Hilo Kilvan."
The next expert witness entered the courtroom. Lonnie was collected early Saturday morning by a company jet and was flown to Charlotte. Ken met him at the airport in a company van, and 15 minutes later they arrived at the Superhouse headquarters. Ken and Ben showed him around. They had coffee with George Teaker, the CEO, in his large office, and then Lonnie was shown a video about the company. According to the video, Superhouse was going to grow by 15% a year for the next 6 years. Profits would be amazing. When the video finished, a young man arrived with details about health care, share options, and vacations. After lunch in a smart restaurant, there were more meetings and another video. By now, Lonnie needed some fresh air, and Ken suggested that they could go and play golf. Lonnie had never played golf before, a fact that Ken knew, but he suggested that they go and get some sunshine anyway. They drove through neat farms and tree-lined roads until they reached the country club. Lonnie was nervous about entering a smart country club and decided to leave if he saw no other black faces. But George Teaker was in the club lounge with 2 black gentlemen. They all greeted Lonnie warmly, and he felt much better. They drank and talked and planned the future. Lonnie stayed the night in the country club and woke the next morning with a slight headache. That morning, there were 2 brief meetings. The first was with George Teaker, who wanted Lonnie to run the Biloxi store for 90 days under a new contract. If all went well, he'd be transferred to a larger store. They were then joined by a lawyer, Taunton, who handed Lonnie a proposed contract of employment.
"Look over it," Taunton said, tapping his chin with a designer pen, "and we'll talk next week."
He took out a notepad.
"Just a few questions," he said.
The questions were routine.
Then he asked, "Have you, in your capacity as store manager, been involved in litigation?"
"Yes, I have," replied Lonnie. "About 4 years ago, an old man slipped and fell on a wet floor. He sued."
"Did it go to trial?"
asked Taunton. He knew every detail.
"No," replied Lonnie. "The claim was settled out of court."
Taunton glanced at Teaker and said,
This tobacco trial in Biloxi could be serious for companies like ours. If the plaintiff wins the case and there's a big verdict, there will be a lot more tobacco litigation. The lawyers will go crazy. They'll bankrupt the tobacco companies. We make a lot of money from tobacco sales, Lonnie, Teaker said with perfect timing. There has to be an end to these trials. The tobacco industry has never lost one of them. I think their record is something like 55 wins. He took a deep breath. Sorry if I said too much, but this trial is so important. Lonnie thought about this. Taunton was a lawyer, so he wouldn't talk about the trial in a way that wasn't appropriate. No problem, he said. Taunton was suddenly all smiles and promised to call Lonnie. The meeting was over. On Monday morning, the jurors met over coffee and talked about their weekends. Herman was late, so he couldn't stop them whispering about the trial. I think I was followed at the weekend, said Nicholas. Why would they follow you? Someone asked. That's what the tobacco companies do. They spend millions of dollars selecting us and more watching us.
How do you know it's the tobacco company? Asked Sylvia, lighting another cigarette.
I don't. But they have more money than the plaintiff. In fact, they have unlimited funds to fight these cases. For Wendell Rohr and the plaintiff's team, the weekend had brought no rest. They'd traced Marlee's fax back to a truck stop near Hattiesburg and obtained an unclear description of a young woman, late 20s, maybe early 30s, wearing a fishing cap with a face half hidden by dark glasses. It was the opinion of the 8 principal plaintiffs' lawyers that this was something new. No one could recall a trial in which a person outside had contacted the lawyers with hints of what the jury might do. They all agreed that she'd be back and that she'd probably ask for money. A deal. Money for a verdict. They didn't dare, however, to plan how they might deal with her. Maybe later, but not now. Fitch, on the other hand, thought of little else. He'd spent the weekend watching jurors and meeting with lawyers. He'd been pleased with the Ken and Ben show in Charlotte and had been assured by George Teaker that they could trust Lonnie Shaver. Fitch slept 4 hours Saturday and 5 Sunday. He dreamed of the girl Marlee and what she might bring him. This could be his easiest verdict yet. Fitch watched the courtroom on Monday from the viewing room in his office. He listened as Dr. Hilo Kilvan continued with his testimony. Fitch's consultants were certain that the plaintiff's witnesses hadn't really made a strong impression on the jurors. In court, Nicholas sent a note to the judge saying that he needed to see him urgently. At lunchtime, he went to the judge's chambers. I need to be quick, said Nicholas. It's Frank Herrera. We talked about him last time. Well, his mind is made up, and I'm afraid he's trying to influence people.
Is he discussing the case?
Once, with me. Herman is very proud of being foreman of the jury, and he won't allow talk about the trial. And another thing. Nicholas opened his case and pulled out a videocassette. He looked at a videocassette recorder in the corner. May I? The judge nodded. On the video, they watched a man enter Nicholas's apartment. They saw the man, Doyle, taking pictures of the apartment and then leaving. I was robbed and beaten about 5 years ago, and I almost died. I'm careful about security now, said Nicholas. Fitch's sandwich was interrupted with the words he was waiting to hear. The girl's on the line. He grabbed the phone. Fitch, baby, it's me, Marlee. Don't know the guy's name, but he's the goon you sent into Easter's apartment on Thursday, just after I gave you the note. Anyway, later, you sent the same goon into the courtroom. That was stupid, because Easter recognized him and he sent a note to the judge. Are you listening, Fitch?
Listening, but not breathing. Yes.
Well, now the judge knows that the guy broke into Easter's apartment. So get him out of town, fast.
2 hours later, Doyle was flying to Chicago. At 3:30, the jurors were sent back to their room, and Judge Harkin questioned the lawyers about the break-in at Nicholas's apartment. Nicholas was called to the meeting, and the judge questioned him about the man who'd been following him. Nicholas answered in perfect detail, giving dates and places, and also describing the security measures in his apartment. He played the video cassette again. After he'd gone, Judge Harkin and the lawyers considered their options. Back in court, Judge Harkin apologized for his decision. It was very rare to sequester a jury, but he had no choice in this case. The jurors should leave, go home, pack, and report to the court the next day, ready to spend the next 2 weeks sequestered. Chapter 5. The Siesta Motel. On Monday night, Nicholas invited Jerry to go to a casino to celebrate their last hours of freedom. Jerry invited Sylvia Taylor Tatum. They were becoming friendly. Sylvia was divorced for the second time, and Jerry would soon be divorced for the first. Lonnie Shaver spent Monday night working. He contacted George Teaker at his home and explained that the jury was going to be sequestered and that the judge had forbidden any direct phone calls to and from the motel. Teaker was sympathetic and worried about the result of the trial.
Our people in New York think a guilty verdict could really damage the economy, especially in our business.
I'll do what I can, Lonnie promised.
You've got to help us, Lonnie. I know it's difficult, but you're there, know what I mean?
Sure, I understand. I'll do what I can. Durwood Cable waited until almost 9 on Monday evening to talk to Fitch.
We were embarrassed in court this afternoon, Cable said. Who was the guy in the apartment? He wasn't one of my men. We have reason to believe that he was a goon employed by Rohr and his boys.
Can you prove it?
I don't have to prove a damn thing. And I don't have to answer any more questions. Your job is to win in court.
I rarely lose.
Fitch went to the door. I know, and you're doing a fine job, Cable. You just need a little help from the outside.
Nicholas arrived first with 2 gym bags filled with clothes. Lou Dell and Willis, a deputy, were waiting outside the jury room to collect the bags and store them. It was 8:20 Tuesday morning.
How do the bags get from here to the hotel? We'll take them over later, Willis said, but we have to inspect them first.
No one's inspecting these bags.
Judge's orders,
said Lou Dell.
I don't care what the judge has ordered. No one is inspecting my bags.
Nicholas placed them in a corner and walked to the coffee pot. By 8:45, all 12 jurors were present, and the room was full of baggage that Nicholas had rescued and stored. He'd done a fine job of making the jury feel really angry about the question of their baggage. At 9, Lou Dell knocked on the door.
It's time to go. The judge is ready for you.
Tell the judge we're not coming out, said Nicholas. The courtroom was full on Tuesday morning, so many people witnessed Lou Dell whispering to the judge. He wondered what to do. His jury was on strike. The judge addressed the court. Gentlemen, there is a small problem with the jury. I need to speak to them. When the judge knocked on the jury door, Nicholas opened it. What's the problem? Asked the judge. We don't think it fair that the deputies search our bags. Why not? It's routine in all sequestration cases. These are our personal possessions. We're not terrorists or drug smugglers. We're not coming out until you promise our bags will be left alone. Fine, replied the judge. The bags will not be searched. But if I find out that a juror possesses any item which is on the list I gave you yesterday, then that juror could be sent to jail. Do you understand? Easter looked round the room at the other jurors. That's fine, Judge, he said. But there's one other problem. According to your rules here, we're allowed one personal visit per week. We think we should get more. The judge didn't want to have a discussion about it. Can we agree on 2? It's only a couple of weeks, he asked. 2 with a possible third, said Nicholas. That's fine. Does that suit everybody? Thank you, Your Honor, Herman said loudly. The jury were ready to enter the courtroom. News of the break-in to Nicholas's apartment affected the Pinex share price. On the Tuesday morning, it started to fall. Then rumors started that the jury had refused to leave the jury room because the testimony offered by the plaintiff was so boring. The share price rose again. The woman juror that Fitch wanted to influence most was Ricky Coleman. She was a pretty 30-year-old mother of 2. She worked as an administrator in a local hospital, and her husband was a private pilot. Neither of the Colemans smoked, and there was no evidence that they drank. Because of her lifestyle and her job in a hospital, Fitch was afraid of Ricky Coleman as a juror. Fitch had managed to get hold of medical records for 7 out of the 12 jurors, including those of Ricky Coleman. After some investigation, he discovered that while Ricky had been at a small Bible college in Montgomery, Alabama, she'd become pregnant, but had decided not to have the baby. The operation was carried out in a small private women's hospital a week after her 20th birthday. The father wasn't named. Ricky had met her husband a year after she finished college. Fitch was willing to bet a lot of money that he didn't know about Ricky's pregnancy. The motel was called the Siesta Motel, and it was 50 kilometers along the coast. The trip was made by bus. The jurors felt tired and lonely. Only Nicholas was delighted with sequestration, but he managed to look depressed. The bus was followed by Fitch's boys and 2 detectives working for Roar. No one expected the motel address to remain a secret. The jurors were on the first floor of one wing of the motel. Lou Dell and Willis had rooms by the door leading to the main building.